live for Open Tech Will Save Us number 9. We've got a fabulous show. We're doing a slightly Christmas theme, but only because it's December. Beyond that, we're not really acknowledging it. So let's introduce Angie Goudon. She's from Microsoft, particularly working with chat-ons. So hello.
Hello.
How you doing? Then, good. We have Ben Francis, who will be presenting the relaunch of WebThings. Hey. And we've got Nad, our very own Nad from Element. Nad's been beavering away. He's always working on something, but the new Spaces redesign, which is hotly anticipated, and I'm not going to spoil the surprise too much, although anybody who stalks us on GitHub may have already seen some of the ideas. But he's going to give a really nice product-centric overview of what's going on there. But I want to say, first of all, thank you, Angie, and I'll let you introduce your Mobilism project.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Angie, and I'm one of the 3 co-directors of Microsoft, which is a not-for-profit French popular educational organization. In this organization, I'm in charge of public relationship, pedagogical engineering, and chat-ons coordination. I don't have to explain chat-ons is because I think you presented last session.
We did. We had a great intro from Poppy last month.
Yeah, good. Maybe I will share my presentation. Try it's okay. Tell me. Is it okay for you? Oh, it's small. Maybe I can enlarge it a little bit. Yeah, okay. Like
there we go.
Yeah. And I'm going to present you now a software which is called Mobilism. But maybe just to begin, I give you my contact things, but not very important. Just to talk about Microsoft, because Microsoft is the organization who developed Mobilism. So it's important to know from who, from where, for which purpose we do it. So Microsoft is not-for-profit French popular educational organization, and we promote digital freedom, so many practical and useful projects. As you can see in this slide, we are a very small organization because we are only 35 members, including the 9 employees. Our economic model is essentially based on donations. We've got about 800 patrons per year. And our goal is to offer mainly online a set of concrete and practical tools to facilitate adoption of free software, of free cultural creations, and of free services. So most of the time, people present us as gateway to the free world. We try to be a bridge between free software communities and general public. That's why we are a popular educational organization. Yeah, we've got a lot of projects, so Mobilize is one of them. But another, which is very important for us, is Digitalize Your Internet, which was a campaign we started in 2014. And since that time, Microsoft has been working on increased awareness about data centralization issues by monopolistic organization, and propose alternative services on its servers to prove that free Lib Software offers technical and practical tools, disseminate these tools in order to increase hosting, ethical service options, and help internet users who want to achieve their digital emancipation. Mobilism is one of these tools. It's an online tool to help manage your events, your profiles, and your groups. And the observation who made us think about this software is that climate wars were organize on Facebook. Free software hackathons were using Meetup to organize themselves. And we think that to change the world, utopians, like us in Fromsoft, but most of them, too often organize themselves on web giant centralized platforms. So, and we are we think that we can't change the world from Facebook. So the tool of our dreams, we know that the surveillance capitalism companies are not able to produce it. They wouldn't know how to take advantage of it. So it was an opportunity to do better than them by doing things differently. So that's what we think about this tool. At the beginning of 2019, we spent a few months to look at what a tool that would really empower individuals and groups could look like. And we worked with the help of two designers, Marie-Cécile Paccard and Geoffrey John, to better understand activist digital practices. It was very important for us to start from the beginning about the practice. How do these people organize themselves? What do they need? And after we think about how we could help them with our tools. So creating such a tool with no other goal for us than to build a digital commons requires time, involvement, and resources. But we were convinced of the importance that Mobilize can have in the long term for many communities. So in May 2019, we launched a crowdfunding to finance this new software and to ensure that this tool was relevant. Apparently it was. Since a few weeks later, we raised the funding. And over 1,000 people formed this project. On October 2019, we published the first beta version of Mobilize, and 1 year later, we published the V1 version, exactly on the 27th of October. Mobilism is a practical tool, so it will help you to find, create, organize events, but you can also create a page for your group where the members will be able to organize together. How can I say? The features, there are many features. I don't think I have time to present all of them, but I think you can find it. But it's important you know that you can create a detailed page for your event, you can publish it, you can share it. But there's also a search engine for if you're looking for events, you can search by keywords, location, or dates. You can participate in events. Even without an account, it's possible to participate anonymously. So yeah, Facebook will never do that, of course. And you can add events to your calendar. So there's an export feature about that. Yeah. Setting up an account on Mobilized instance will allow you to create several profiles. We are talking about identities, maybe like personal identities, professional identity, hobbies identity, activism identity. Maybe you don't want to share events you are doing or you are participating with one identity with other events. So it's important for us to have those many possibilities. You also can organize events and you can manage groups. Mobilize is an ethical alternative to Facebook events, to Facebook groups, to Facebook page. And we thought about a tool designed to serve users. There's no likes, there's no follows, there's no infinite wall to scroll. We just think about a tool who leaves you in control of your attention. But the truth is, mobilism may feel very confusing for many people because design aims to free your attention from the mechanism of self-staging. So it's allow you to stay focused on the essential, managing your events, your groups, your mobilization. Where most platforms gamble on your user experience and flatter your ego to better capture your attention and data, Mobilizer is just a tool. It's not a hobby where you can scroll endlessly. It's just a service to organize your events and group. It's very important to understand that, because it's easy and simply, really. So, for example, Mobilize is designed. You can follow the news of a group, but you can't follow the news of an individual. It's impossible to follow a single profile. Yeah, profiles have no wall, no thread, no story. Only groups can publish posts. And the goal is to get rid of the self-professional reflexes where we stage our lives to be the person at the center of our followers. With Mobilize, it's not the ego, but the collective that counts. Finally, if there is no ability to like a comment or a message in a group discussion, it keeps the exchange informative. This prevents a common exchange from turning into a dialogue duel where you have to keep and save face. Mobilism is, of course, a free Lib software. I think Matrix community knows about it, but I don't have to explain what is a free Lib software, but just to remember that because the code is transparent and publicly auditable, there's no hidden features. So the code is built with the community and everyone is free to fork it and lead the project into new direction. It's very important for us. And moreover, the culture of free Lib software is community-driven culture of contribution. So Mobilism should be seen as digital commons that everyone can use and to which everyone can contribute. So your remarks, your feedbacks, your skills, maybe in translation, users test, explanations, tutorials, codes, whatever, will be considered as contributions to the common project. The license of Mobilize is under HGPL 3. And of course, you can find it on Git repository. Mobilism is a federated software. So that means that there's no one but several mobilizers. And if you go to mobilizon.org, you will find a selection of instances. I think I don't have to explain what is an instance. Sorry. I think I don't have to explain you what is an instance. Each of these instances offers you the same service, but from different hosts. Multiplying Mobilize instance is healthier for internet, as it avoids the formation of web giant, decentralizing usage over multiple instances, prevents creation of huge data sets that could be exploited for surveillance or mass manipulation. So it's easier for you. It allows you to find your host, the one whose management, turn of use, business model, moderation charter, etc., match with your values. Of course, each of these instances can federate with each other as well as interacting with them. And because the software uses ActivityPub protocol, so it's part of what we call the Fediverse. You can find a list of Mobilizer instance on a website. I see that. Yeah, I write it there. Okay. So you've got the address. There are currently 61 instances, and most of them are French instances. Of course, Microsoft is French, our network is French, most of our network is French. So there's not a lot of other countries that other people in other countries who install this software. But you can find there's 2 instances from USA and 2 others from Australia. I think because it's important for how can I say that? People to find an instance with people from their country, I think. I think it's not possible. It's possible technically, but it's better to find an instance near where you live, of course. And so that's a core. Well, because we don't have instance from UK, we don't have instance from a lot of many countries. So if you have skills to do it, yeah, please try to install one Mobilize instance. Just go on this website and you can add your instance to this list so we can show it and promote it and explain people, in which country there is other instance. I want to talk to you about Rose. Rose is Mobilism's mascot. Because Rose is conceived and designed by David Revoix. David Revoix is an illustrator, author and illustrator of comics, which is called Pepper and Carrot. And David Revoix is one of the most famous comics illustrator using Creative Commons license on his creation. So we asked him to find a mascot to represent all the people for whom we designed Mobilize. So Rose is autonomous. She's a fennec, as you see. Maybe it's not really an element you can find, but yeah, she's a fennec and she's autonomous, she's voluntary, and she lives in a beautiful but arid, sometimes hostile landscape, like activists. So she's the representation of them, and she needs to get together with her fellow fennecs, being to organize and mobilize themselves around actions that can change our world, one grain of sand at a time. If I have 2 minutes, if you want to host an instance of Mobilism, we've got some documents. Websites, and you can discover technical documentation to do it. So how can you can install, you can manage the dependencies, you can configure your instance and upgrade to a new release. It's very important for us that not all people who are using this software concentrate on only one instance. At this time, most of them are on Microsoft instance, and we really want that internet users can go in other places for that. So please, if you are charmed by this software, please host one of them and let us know. If you don't want to install an instance, you can also participate to the moderation, because even if Mobilism is not really social networks, of course there's contents published on it. So there's need of moderation team to regularly consult the reports that are made and to process them. There's a lot of features about this moderation tools. So you can find it on this address. And most of them, of course, Mobilize is a free software, so you can be a contributor. It's important for us. We write a big documentation about how you can contribute. And of course, you can suggest feature requests, enhancement suggestions, or bug reports. But if you're not very comfortable, like I am, I'm not a technician. I didn't say it at the beginning. I have to say it because if some people ask me about technical issues, I'm not good at it at all. But if you're not comfortable with writing code, there's a lot of other types of contributions that are possible. Maybe design or graphics or writing documentation, tutorials, etc. There's a lot of ideas. Contributing is really a great way to get involved in a project and to meet other community members. So yeah, don't be shy about it. There's another way to contribute is to translate Mobilize. Mobilize is currently available in 14 languages, but yeah, it's possible to make the software available in much more. So if you are and easy, fluent in a different language, please, do it. It's very important. It's you can translate the software, or you can translate the website who explained it. So we've got two websites, mobilize.org and joinmobilize.org, and so you can also translate these two websites. Because we don't speak Polish, we don't speak a lot of language. So please do it. Yeah. And if you want to get in touch or know the news, I write you the different place where you can find information about evolution, what's new, what's happening, and just places to talk, exchange with the community, like the Matrix Room, for example. And so I hope I meet you there next time. Yeah. I finished just on this. Fromsoft, as I said, is a little organization. So, and his business model is most of it by donations. So if you want to help us, we've got a website for this. Thank you. And if you have questions, I will be happy to answer.
That's a great presentation. Thank you, Angie. I'm actually really interested in seeing Mobilizon work, actually for the exact reason that a couple of people said in the chat, which is that the events on Facebook is one of the things that ties people to that platform. So I think it's really going to be interesting to see you succeed in that space. You've disappeared. I don't know if we.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Sorry.
We've scared your camera away.
To keep it back.
Something's changed. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's not my hair, so I don't understand why.
I don't know. You're broadcasting 5 or 6 pixels square. Not sure why. Never mind. So there were some questions. Most of them actually. Oh, welcome back. You did actually answer some of them preemptively. So one of the questions was about the graphics, and it's really cool. It's one of the things that people comment on really early. Can you give who was the designer, the illustrator that you named just then?
The designer is Marie-Cécile Paccard.
Okay.
You can find it, I think, on our blog. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can give a.
Sure. It should be available there. Yeah, I encourage people to check out the Mobilizon website because it's really it's a really polished thing that you've got there. People are asking about translations. Yes. Here's one from me. How did you decide to focus on events? So if you're going to isolate social features, why events are actually something that's really important and perhaps a little bit underserved. So I wonder if you can speak to how you chose that as a product.
I'm not sure because I wasn't working in Fromsoft when it happens, but I know the stories.
Okay.
But the departure point was when the first climate march in France was organized. The only place you can find information about this walk was on Facebook, and in front of most of members are interested by this works, this climate works, and we were so amazed that we can't find the information in any server. So we said, well, we need. It's very important that we've got a tool to push people from ecological transition to organize themselves on other tools than Facebook. There's a problem of how can I say that in English? Sorry, just looking for a word.
I should have prepped you with the question.
Yeah, of coherence.
Coherence. Yeah, absolutely.
Problem of coherence. You can do things good for the planet or to defend freedom, and use a tool which is totally the opposite. So that was the departure point.
So that's, I mean, the medium is the message, we might say, is that you have to choose something that delivers the right message. All right, and here's something else. A problem that we potentially face when building distributed systems on the social side is, how do you get people to use it? It's very difficult to bootstrap these things, because unless there's already a fan base of users, then it's very hard to drive people into an otherwise empty project. You seem to have some quite good ideas. I mean, we already talked about the graphics and some of the marketing there. I didn't know if you had any comments on that point.
In the French world, because it's difficult for us to do it worldwide, we are in relationship with a lot of ecologic organization or other freedom fighters, etc. So in fact, we contact all these organizations to let us know we are working on this software, and we are coaching themselves.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, just that they can adopt the tool.
Interesting. So choosing somebody who's going to be highly susceptible to be a user. I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned marketing. Yeah, I like it. That's a good answer. All right.
And even if it's not French organization, we can do it, but just we don't really know the others. So
exactly.
So if there's people who are from other countries than France, they can contact us, and we can find a way to coach themselves about that. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, build where you are. That's the thing.
And we have. When we are talking about this tool, we said people that, okay, it's not a problem for us if you don't leave Facebook. During several years, I think, it's okay if there's the two tools, because it's not the same audience. So, but it's important that you've got the two areas to publish. Yeah, it's about no giving culpability to this organization or this people.
Right. So here's a related question that's literally just come in: are there any services where you can host this and then basically provide your own domain? I mean, I should plug, this is what EMS do. This is what Element offer. But an optional service that I imagine that you could do for mobile is, say it for me again. I've been saying it wrong, I think. Mobilize. It's just mobilize.
I don't know, because in French we said mobilisons.
Yeah.
But
you're translating it.
Yeah, maybe I'm asking you if you're reading it yourself.
We would say mobilize, but you wouldn't translate a noun.
It's difficult for me, because most of the time I read it and I think in French, not in English.
I understand that.
Mobilizon or mobilize.
I understand that. I think we're working too hard to translate. I don't think we need to.
Exactly, but mobilize. Yeah.
So the question comes: is bigger companies and organizations that don't want to self-host, something that Fremasoft could do is, or a third party is host and then
not hosting them, but making a bridge with other hosters. Because we don't have the capacity to host multiple instances for other organizations, but we connect them with ethical hosters. We know everywhere.
Right. So so people should go to you. That's the real answer.
No problem. They can contact us.
Fab. Angie, thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Hi, good, thanks.
I met you like 2 years ago in a very crowded room in London. You were working on WebThings in those days with Mozilla, and you've since restarted the brand, which is really, really exciting. So yeah, I'd love to hear about what you've been working on, and yeah, tell us more about WebThings.
Yeah, that kind of feels like a lifetime ago already.
It's crazy.
But thanks very much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Great. So, hello everyone. I'm Ben Francis. I'm here to talk about WebThings. So I will briefly tell you who I am, talk about the Web of Things as a unified application layer for the Internet of Things. I'll introduce the WebThings open source project, which was recently spun out of Mozilla. I will teach you how to build your own private smart home with the WebThings gateway, and give a quick introduction to using the WebThing API to monitor and control devices over the web. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's next for the WebThings project. So very briefly about me, I am the founder of Krellian, which is a tech startup based in the northeast of England. I previously worked at Mozilla and Google. I worked at Mozilla for 8 years, first on their Firefox OS mobile operating system, and then in connected devices and emerging technologies, where I co-founded the WebThings project. I'm also a W3C invited expert on web applications and the Web of Things. I just say that bit to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. So Krellian provides smart building solutions. That includes interactive kiosks, digital signage, and building automation. I'm currently working on Krellian's first products around digital signage and offering consulting services to help businesses make their buildings smarter, safer, and more sustainable. So that's the pitch bit. Krellian also sponsors open source projects like WebThings. So let's talk about the Web of Things. And in order to talk about the Web of Things, we first need to talk about the Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things, as you probably know, is for monitoring and controlling physical devices over the internet. And it's currently built mostly on proprietary vertical technology stacks, which don't really talk to each other. And when they do, it requires per vendor integrations. So I kind of think of it as being like the internet before we had the World Wide Web, when there were lots of competing hypertext systems which didn't talk to each other. And then the web eventually came along and provided a unifying application layer protocol for sharing and linking information. So the Web of Things is about applying lessons learned from the World Wide Web to the Internet of Things, to create a decentralized Internet of Things by giving devices URLs on the web to make them linkable and discoverable, and defining a standard data model and protocol to make them interoperable. So the Web of Things isn't intended as just another vertical IoT technology stack to compete with existing platforms. It's intended as a unifying horizontal layer to bridge together underlying IoT protocols. Now, the Web of Things is currently being standardized by the W3C with a slightly dizzying array of specifications. There's 3 working group notes, there's a couple of first public working drafts out, and there's 2 specifications which have now reached W3C recommendation status. I'm just going to talk about 2 specifications today. One of them is the thing description. And this is really the core of the Web of Things standards right now. It's been a W3C recommendation since April. It's a JSON-based file format for describing the capabilities of connected devices in terms of properties, actions, and events. So it's a data model for describing the capabilities. Now, the thing description is designed to be completely programming language and protocol agnostic, which makes it very flexible because it's possible to retrofit a thing description to existing IoT systems. But the downside of that flexibility is that the requirement to support any IoT protocol means that ad hoc interoperability is impossible. In other words, it's not feasible to build a single Web of Things client which can communicate with any Web of Things device. So that's one of the reasons that I'm chairing the WebThing protocol community group to define a concrete sub-protocol for monitoring and controlling devices over the web using HTTP and WebSockets. So this protocol is intended for greenfield IoT applications and devices which want to benefit from that ad hoc interop, so that any client can talk to any device. So we currently have an open call for use cases and requirements, and I'd really encourage contributions from the Matrix community, because I think there are lots of similarities with the Matrix protocol, and I think we could learn from each other. So I'm going to talk about these two specifications in a bit more depth later, but first of all, let's talk about the WebThings project. So WebThings is an open platform for monitoring and controlling devices over the web. Started as a Mozilla project, is incubated inside the Connected Devices and Emerging Technologies departments for 4 years. Now, in August this year, Mozilla had a major company restructuring where they had to, unfortunately, lay off about a quarter of their workforce. And this meant ending their investment in a lot of projects, including WebThings. So I got together with a couple of ex-colleagues, David Bryant and Michael Steegman, to reach an agreement with Mozilla to spin out WebThings as an independent open source project. I'm pleased to say that last week we relaunched the project at the new home of WebThings.io with a new website and replacement cloud infrastructure sponsored by Krellian. So the Web of Things is an open source implementation of those emerging W3C standards. It has 3 main components: the WebThings Gateway, the WebThings Framework, and the WebThings Cloud. So the WebThings Gateway is a software distribution for smart home gateways to let you directly monitor and control your smart home over the web without a middleman. The WebThings Framework is a collection of reusable software components to help developers build their own WebThings, which directly expose the WebThing protocol. And WebThings Cloud is a collection of cloud services for monitoring devices over the internet. But in particular, it provides a secure remote access service, which can create an end-to-end encrypted tunnel between a Web of Things gateway and a Web of Things client so that it can be securely accessed over the internet. So last week, we also announced the 1.0 release of WebThings Gateway after 12 0.x releases. And this release includes a path for existing users to transition their gateways from the old Mozilla-run infrastructure to the new community-run services. So I'm going to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of how to build your own private smart home with a WebThings gateway. For this, you will need a Raspberry Pi single-board computer. You will need a micro SD card. And if you want to use protocols other than Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you also might want to have some USB dongles to add support for things like Zigbee and Z-Wave. So first of all, you download the pre-built software image from our website. You flash that image onto an SD card. I recommend using Blender Etcher for this. Makes it super easy. You then boot up the Raspberry Pi, remembering to plug in the SD card first. And when it boots up, it acts as a Wi-Fi hotspot that you can connect to configure the gateway. So you can then connect to your home Wi-Fi network, or you can skip this step to just connect via Ethernet. And then it gives you the opportunity to register your own secure subdomain for your gateway. Now, what this does is it creates an end-to-end encrypted tunnel between your web browser and your gateway over the internet using magic. And when I say magic, what I really mean is it registers a WebThings.io subdomain and configures the DNS. It automatically issues a TLS certificate from Let's Encrypt, which is unique to your gateway. It configures a dynamic tunneled reverse proxy. Yes, you heard that right. A dynamic tunneled reverse proxy from WebThings to the cloud, WebThings cloud servers to your gateway, and then safely tunnels through your firewall so you don't need to configure dynamic DNS and open up ports on your home router. So this step is optional. You can just configure DNS, TLS, and NAT yourself, but it makes it a lot easier, and it's a convenient way to securely access your gateway over the internet. So then you create your first user account, and these user accounts are on the gateway itself inside your home. They're not on any cloud service. And boom, you have an empty things screen. So from this screen, you can start to add things. from your home network. So if you click the big add button, it starts to scan for devices on your network using the protocols that you have add-ons installed for. And then those things get added as these icons on the things screen. So these icons will give you an overview of the status of these events, and you can tap them to toggle on-off states. And then if you click the little splat icon in the top right-hand corner, it will go to the detail view for that thing. And the properties and actions of the thing that are described in its thing description are represented graphically on the screen. So this is a light with an on-off switch, a brightness slider, and a color picker to set its color. The gateway has a collection of over 100 add-ons, most of which are contributed by the community, to add support for lots of different devices and protocols. You can also configure if this then that style rules to automate your home using a simple drag and drop interface. So you can drag a trigger to the left-hand side and then an action to the right-hand side. And you can have multiple inputs and multiple outputs if you like. You can also upload a floor plan of your home, so you can get an at-a-glance overview of all the devices as they're laid out in your home. And this view is interactive as well. And you can set it up to log particular properties of particular devices over time and view a graph of those logs. So some of you might be interested in what's under the hood of this gateway software. So at its core is a Node.js web server. The web front end communicates with that backend web server using the WebThing API over HTTP and WebSockets. And then the backend communicates with adapter add-ons, which each could run in their own process and can be written in any programming language. They communicate with the main process over an IPC mechanism, which we've just switched from nano message to using WebSockets internally. So that's the WebThings gateway. It's given you an idea. Getting a bit more technical now, I wanted to dive into how the front end talks to the back end and what this emerging standard is for communicating with the devices over the web. So I'm going to talk about the WebThing API. Now, you may have noticed earlier I mentioned the WebThing API, and I also mentioned the WebThing protocol. So I just want to explain the difference. So the WebThing API is what the WebThings project currently implements. And that is a specification which started as a Mozilla W3C member submission. But since then, so the WebThing API specification has 3 sections. It has a thing description section, it has a REST API, and a WebSocket API. Now, the thing description section has now been standardized as the W3C thing description, and the other 2 sections, the REST API and the WebSocket API, are in the process of being standardized as the WebThing protocol. So what I'm going to talk about today is the WebThing API, which isn't quite the W3C standard, but it's very close. And I'll call out the areas where it's different and why. So first of all, the thing description. This is a very simple example of a thing description. It's a device with a title, a description, and a single property called on, which is a Boolean property that can be toggled on and off. And there's a link here to an HTTP endpoint that you can use to read and write that property. Here's a slightly more complicated example of a property description, which is a level, which is an integer expressed as a percentage between 0 and 100. And it's not read-only, so it's writable. This is an example of describing an action that you can perform on the device. So this is a fade action, which has an input with 2 properties of level and duration. So this is an action which is requesting for a lamp to fade to a certain level over a particular number of milliseconds. This is a description of an event. So this is an overheated event that can be emitted by a device, which has a payload with a number, which represents a temperature in degrees Celsius. And finally, this is a list of links that you can put in the thing description. And so this links to other resources about that device. Now, this is one of the key differences between the Mozilla specification and the W3C thing description standard. In Mozilla's WebThing API, it provides links to these API endpoints, and it assumes that the client knows how to communicate using the WebThing API. In the W3C specification, they define forms that's what they call them, which tells the client exactly how to formulate a request in a given protocol using what I call declarative protocol binding. So everything's described in the thing description itself. Now, for very simple examples, these two approaches are basically identical. But for very complex examples, the W3C thing description can get very complex because you have to describe every little detail of how to communicate with a device. And we've also found that it's not quite expressive enough to describe any given existing API, including the WebThing API. So this is one of the reasons that we're working on the WebThing protocol to provide an external specification of how to communicate with a device. So that was the thing description. I'm now going to talk about the thing REST API, which is how to communicate with devices over HTTP. So to set and get a property is very simple. You have the URL of a property, and you send an HTTP GET request to that URL, and it replies with a JSON payload with a key and value. So on, and it's saying that the on is set to false. If you want to set that property, it's an HTTP PUT request with a JSON payload with a key value pair saying I want to set on to true. And that will then echo back 200, OK, and echo back that on has been set to true. So to do this from JavaScript, you would use the fetch method to just send a PUT request with a content type of JSON, requesting a response type of JSON. And there's also an authorization header in here to authenticate that request. And then the payload, which is that JSON key value pair. Now, to invoke an action, you send an HTTP POST request with the arguments to that action, in this case, asking a lamp to fade to 50% over 2 seconds. Now, the response to that request is a 201 created response because it's telling you that a new resource has been created, which represents your action request. And you can then get that resource to get the status of that action request if it's a long-running request, and send a delete request to cancel that action if you want to. Now, we found that this is one of the things that the current W3C thing description specification is not very good at describing because it doesn't deal very well with dynamic resources. So that's one of the things we're trying to address in the WebThing protocol, and we're trying to fix in the thing description specification. And this is how to get a log of events using HTTP. So you just get the events URL, and you've got a log of recent events emitted by the device. Now, this obviously isn't a very efficient way of getting events from a device. You have to keep polling the URL. So that's one of the reasons that we are working on the separate WebSocket API. So let's talk about the WebSocket API. So you open the WebSocket endpoint that I mentioned earlier, and you can set a property. So each message, has a message type and a payload as data. So this is a set property message, which is telling the left motor property to set to 100. This is how you do that from JavaScript. So you open the WebSocket at the WebSocket URL using the WebThings subprotocol, and then you send a message over that socket of type set property with a payload of left motor set to 100. To request an action, you send a request action message with the name of the action you want to invoke. To subscribe to an event, you send an add event subscription message with the name of the event that you want to subscribe to, in this case, a motion event. Now, this type of event, of message is a property status message. And so this type of message is pushed from the device to the client, whereas the other messages were the other way around. So this is when a property changes, the device will push a message back to the client and say, this is the new value of that property. This is an action status message, which is pushed from the device to the client to say that the status of a long-running action has changed. In this case, a grab action of a robot has completed, and it tells you the time that action was requested and the time it was completed. And this is an event that's pushed from the device to the client with a timestamp. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the WebThing API, the thing description, the REST API, and the WebSocket API. What's next for the WebThings project? Well, it's very much in the hands of the community now. So we really want to know what the community wants to see from the project going forward. I published a blog post last week with some ideas about what I'd like to see. Some of those things are W3C compliance. So I've mentioned the differences between the Mozilla spec and the W3C spec. Really want to iron those out and fill in the gaps with the WebThing protocol. The gateway software image is currently based on the Raspbian operating system, which has been great for the initial target use case of DIY smart home users using a Raspberry Pi. But for more enterprise and consumer use cases, I'd like to explore a more production quality base operating system. I'm also interested in software for controller devices like smart speakers and displays, possibly a native mobile app that can act as a Web of Things client, and expanding the selection of cloud services for monitoring devices over the internet and things like cloud-to-cloud integrations and voice assistant integrations. So that's it. You can find out more about WebThings at webthings.io. You can follow us on Twitter, fork us on GitHub, or you can come and chat with us in our Matrix chat channel, which is the IoT channel on chat.mozilla.org.
Whew. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. That was a really strong whistle-stop tour. You know what's funny is in the chat, people have been asking questions and then saying, "Oh no, it's good. He's answered it." So it's good.
I'm pleased about that.
So there's one outstanding. Bala would like more information about the reverse proxy connectivity for devices behind a NAT or firewall. Is that a standard? Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, so for a long time, this was just black magic to me. It's really incredible. But it's actually based on an open source project called PageKite. And so we're running PageKite in the cloud and on the gateway. But we've added a bit of special sauce to that. So we've added the facility to automatically register the subdomains, configure DNS in the cloud, and then issue the certificates from Let's Encrypt, who have kindly upped our usage limits, because we're hitting the caps on the certificates you could issue. But basically, it's a TCP tunnel. So you have a bit of software running on the gateway and a bit of software running in the cloud, which then allows a secure HTTPS connection to go from your browser to the gateway, which is initiated from the gateway side. So that what you don't have to do is have users configuring their routers and opening up ports and things, which is really tricky to do. So it does mean we have to run a service which has costs associated with it, but it makes things a lot more convenient for users.
On which subject, what sort of scale are you seeing now? I know you only really just relaunched, but are you getting an engagement from users?
Yeah, so we've been really impressed with the take-up of the number of people transitioning, because we weren't sure how that was going to look. I don't have exact numbers yet. We're waiting for the first week to go past, but I can tell you we had originally, like the original gateway project, we've had over 100,000 downloads, and there are thousands of gateways out there in the wild. So we're looking to see how many of those gateways transition over to the new infrastructure. But yeah, it's looking pretty good.
That is fun.
I'm also about to hit the limit of the free tier on the MailChimp mailing list. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Those are the metrics, aren't they? SurveyMonkey and MailChimp, and where you get to their free limits is always interesting. So one slightly more contentious question is, can you reasonably compare WebThings against Home Assistant?
Oh, yeah, sure. So we know the Home Assistant guys. We're good friends. We've talked about getting Home Assistant to actually implement Web of Things standards, because what we'd love to have is multiple interoperable implementations. But no, very friendly with those guys. I'd say the main differences are, I'm trying to be as objective as I can. Home Assistant's been around for longer. It has better device support. It supports a larger number of devices. It's also a bit more complicated to set up, because it requires a lot of manual configuration using YAML files. Whereas WebThings, people usually comment that it has a much more friendly user interface. Everything's much more graphical, and it's simpler to set up, but probably has fewer features. So I say, like, we have over 100 add-ons, so there's a lot of devices out there supported, including loads of Zigbee, Z-Wave, HomeKit, and Bluetooth, all kinds of things. But it doesn't quite have the same level of device support as HomeKit. So it really depends what you're looking for. Are you looking for something that's really flexible, really hackable, that you configure with YAML files? Or are you looking for something that's easier to set up, built on emerging web standards, and gives you a friendly user interface?
All right, that's very, very democratic, very diplomatic of you. Thank you. Thank you for that great presentation. All of my questions were answered. I was going to ask, as a consumer, what should I be buying? But a Raspberry Pi is a perfect choice for a gateway, I think. Yeah, that was you've answered everything.
Oh,
thank you. Oh yeah, go on. Sorry, I didn't ask you before.
No, it's quite all right. I was just going to jump in. I think the WebSocket transport for the protocol looks really interesting. And you're quite right that there is some overlap between Matrix as a protocol and the WebThing protocol from what I've seen there. And something that always confused me about Matrix is that like 4 years ago, we built a WebSocket transport for it. And we did it as a proxy, as it happened, that converted something that looks really similar to the kind of line protocol that you have there to between the kind of REST representation and the WebSocket one. And it works, and it exists, and nobody has ever used it, as far as I know. And we've never quite understood why, because, well, it basically, our assumption is that for at least Matrix, the performance that you get from the WebSocket just isn't worth it for, we rate limit traffic anyway to a couple of messages a second to stop people spamming, like you do on IRC. And the fact that you long poll and it automatically gives you back propagation and sort of rate control on the messages coming through doesn't seem that people have wanted it. But I'm wondering whether you've seen anything like that, or whether everybody got really excited and immediately switched over to using WebSockets, or whether it's just the flavor of data is different, or what?
Yeah, so it is amazing what you can achieve with HTTP with just 4 basic verbs. It's such a flexible protocol, but it isn't a protocol which is well suited to IoT use cases, if I'm honest. There's a lot of events flying around, and there's a lot of information that you want to push from the server to the client, at least the way around that we've implemented it. So there are some real limitations, and it's one of the things that the W3C working group struggled with was things like, how do we standardize how to do events? Because there are a bunch of different ways of doing events over HTTP, like server-sent events, like long polling, webhooks, and none of them are that widely supported or widely understood. And so they always get stuck about which one to pick. And so for us, WebSockets provided primarily a way to push information from a device to a client, which in the case of IoT is super, super useful. We certainly use it a lot within the gateway implementation, just to speed things up, because you can just have one WebSocket to push all the information over rather than lots of individual HTTP requests. So it helps with, especially with a constrained device like the Raspberry Pi, where you don't want to be sending too many HTTP requests. It really helps make that more efficient. But it's difficult to measure how many people are using WebSocket versus HTTP, because most people are using the gateway front end, and what we don't have is a lot of people using independent WebThings clients because they don't exist. So that's one of the things that we want to fix, like with a mobile app.
Makes sense. Very exciting. Can't wait to do a bridge. Is there a bridge, do we know, to Matrix? Ben, you should know this.
There is, yeah. So there's a bridge from the 2018 era, but I don't know how much really time was spent on it and whether it got a lot of use in the world. But the WebThings GitLab of the day, had a project. Actually, yes, it's been updated in the last month. Interesting.
There you go.
Interesting. I mean, Matrix. It's just JSON in. So yeah, that's,
actually, so I should say. So I'm a Matrix user because Mozilla switched from IRC to Matrix quite a while ago. But I only found out yesterday that Matrix is also, the protocol is intended for use for IoT applications. And so I'm really interested to learn more about that.
Only in as much as it's just a generic event bus for JSON.
But I think Matrix solves a lot of really tricky problems, like things like synchronization, which is a super hard problem to solve. So that's why I say I think both protocols could learn from each other.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd be well up for that. I wish I had more time to do IoT stuff. Unfortunately, Matrix has destroyed all of my spare time to play with IoT stuff. But someday, hopefully, it might happen again.
I should shout out to there's a I've forgotten the author's name, but there's a very functional Mqtt Bridge, which we were playing with some ESP boards and just sending. Basically, as you say, it's use Mqtt to send the messages, but then Matrix for synchronization and storage and everything else that it offers.
Yeah, actually, one of the reasons why the WebSocket stuff got abandoned might be that we shifted to using CoAP for our low bandwidth shenanigans, which is definitely getting more overlappy into IoT land, thanks of course to HTTP having a nice mapping through to CoAP, but also switching from JSON to CBOR and switching from TLS and DTLS to Flate, doing a kind of custom transport layer security thing, which again has been used a little bit more. I'm hoping that next year we might be able to get back to it and do something with it, but it's at that point I think that it starts to collide a little bit more with IoT use cases.
Yeah, and actually we're looking at doing a CoAP binding of the WebThing protocol, because apart from being obviously designed for constrained devices, CoAP also has the benefit of having a native push mechanism in it. So that's a huge benefit. It kind of solves the whole WebSocket problem to a certain extent.
So it's funny that you say that, because we did literal bindings of matrices REST API through to CoAP, which has the disadvantage that it was still receiving messages by long polling over CoAP, which obviously misses the entire point. And so obviously we could do server initiated CoAP requests coming in, or we could use the observe pub sub mechanism, but we never quite got as far as doing either of them. So once our transport has that, it might be almost worthwhile, but short term it's just long polling still.
Thank you, Ben. And I'm actually, something that came up in the chat was that people are really pleased to see this project revived, and don't call it a comeback. It never went away. If you've got thousands of users there already, fab. Thank you very much. And I've linked to your Matrix room in the chat so that people can join there and continue bombarding you with more technical questions than I can pronounce.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
All right. Finally, the final victim is Nad, our very own designer and product fellow. You're going to tell us about Matrix Spaces. I'm not going to introduce it at all, other than to say that I'm really excited, because we've got all kinds of users and customers and people who really want this feature. So I'm dying to see what it looks like. I'll let you take it away.
I might start using product fellow, by the way. I quite like that. I think you might have struck across gold there.
It's your new title.
Titles at this point.
I think it comes with I think that title comes with a raise, actually. So
sweet. And on that note, so I'm Nad. Let me share my screen actually, because I've prepared something slightly different for today actually. Hopefully you can see yourselves over there. And then if I switch, I did start out with a bit of a deck into some demos, but then instead I thought it could be more fun to actually just workshop through some of the problems that we're solving. And kind of the aim for today, I think, is just to give visibility on what spaces are and to talk about them more in the open, and also just demystify the high-level direction for them and why we're building them, and what we think good looks like as opposed to bad, and sort of that kind of stuff. If at any point, especially from your side, Ben or Matthew, if you want to interject and add any more color, especially more from the technical side, or perhaps to speak to some of the legacy around the previous implementations that we have with the old groups API or tags, things like that, feel free to just dive right in. Otherwise, I'll just carry on. So I'm Nad. I head up product and design at Element. The reason why we're working on Spaces in the first place is because they are pivotal to the first-time user experience. And one of the highest priorities we have as a project at the moment is we've sort of done this gnarly thing of handling a lot of the edge cases and more kind of complex use cases as far as communication go, and especially around things like extensibility and things like that. But there's a lot of friction around just getting started, and especially if you're a new user and you've never used Matrix before and you've never used Element before, it can be difficult just to get to your first good conversation, or get to your first kind of useful set of people. Like if you join a company and you want to be able to just get to a group of rooms, or if you want to join an online community and that community has several rooms or several different topics of discussion and so forth. There's just a bunch of friction around all of that at the moment. And so that's really the main reason why, aside from improving the quality of communication all around, that's one of the major kind of drivers for this entire project. And just to set the stage a little bit, Matrix has always put rooms first. Has always put rooms forward first. And that'll continue to be the case. But rooms on their own are amazing primitives, but they have some of the drawbacks as well. They're really powerful for personal communication, where you have really high signal to noise. You participate in quite a small number of rooms. You can organize them freeform, either by a group of people, like maybe you organize a group for a particular sort of part of your family or your neighbors or your friends or whatever, or you organize them for a particular event. That's all fine. But they have a few kind of majors when we start to look at how multifactorial or how multi-use case matrix can be, and communication at large can be, pretty much. Another couple of, just to go through a couple of examples, actually, or just demonstrate a couple of issues. So if I took a screenshot here of my Element iOS client today, where I'm in 176 rooms, and that's a modest amount actually for a kind of committed user on Matrix. But even in terms of sort order, you can see here that I've had so many messages happening in the last few minutes, and I've got no useful way to organize these rooms into a group, or just any way that I can make better sense of them. And this is a huge problem we have today, especially on mobile. On desktop, we actually do have a groups implementation that uses a kind of old, slightly immature groups and tags APIs. But the reality is that this is the view that most people see in Matrix today, or in Element today rather, where we just know that most people aren't using it. So really the sorting of rooms and organization and navigation of rooms is a huge problem today, especially as you get more committed to Matrix and you start to use it for more things. And also another thing that we get a lot of feedback on, especially from larger organizations, is that most solutions today, so most incumbents in kind of project-based or team-based communication, do a really terrible job of representing hierarchies. So if I have a company and I've got several offices or several projects or a mix thereof, it's generally just super clunky being able to navigate anything that's more than, say, 1 or 2 layers deep. And we think this is a really important problem to solve, and it's something that we hear back. It's a very prevalent piece of feedback that we get. We've got repeatedly over the years, basically. So that's another kind of major consideration we've had with designing and working on spaces. So just going to double back on myself slightly. These are mostly for me to make sure that I'm not missing out anything salient. But yeah, the core goal of Spaces is to allow you to be able to communicate with groups of people or groups of topics, so that you can better organize your view of Matrix, rather than it being this mess over here where you just can't navigate once you're getting value from Matrix, getting value from an Element in our case. I mentioned hierarchies. Another thing that was really important to us is that we want to leverage people's existing affordance from other apps and other experiences, and especially with things like, I'll use the term spatial model a lot. So quite physically, like imagine if this was a physical object, and if you were going to, on a browser, you have multiple tabs, you have an expectation of how they work. The same is true of, say, if you use Slack, you're familiar with their workspace model, Discord with their server model, and so forth. And we didn't want people to feel unfamiliar if they're coming from any other environment. So that's been a huge consideration. And the other thing is just to talk about the name of Spaces as well. So historically, if you've been a Matrix community member for a while, you'll know that the name of this feature has changed over time. So I think originally it was called Groups. And we found that people would then conflate groups with group chats, which is a bit of a misnomer, because rooms could be for direct messages, or they can be for any kind of flavor of chat, or for any communication. And then we've also talked a lot about communities over the year, but communities again are a misnomer, because communities are public by default, and not everything is a community. For example, if I join a workspace or a team or a project, it's not necessarily a community. So we started thinking about rooms as a concept and real world metaphors, and then ended up arriving at the word spaces. And really, it's like the word spaces itself is, it captures kind of how multi-use the feature will be, basically, in that, you can have loads of different types of spaces in the real world. You can have your home is really different to an office, which is really different to a place that you'd socialize in, and so on and so forth. So even though it just seems like sort of vain at face value, the name of it's actually been sort of quite important, and I think helps speak to how ambitious we see this feature being over time as well. So that said, there's three main use cases that we wanted to focus on first. And the first one is communities. And we think between these three use cases, there's some sort of subtle differences, but which are actually really indicative to especially the user experience. So communities is a huge one where you want to create a bunch of rooms based on different topics, and you just want to be able to broadcast those with the least amount of friction possible, probably sharing those by links where maybe you might create a community, and then you might want to you know, put that link on your website, put it in your Twitter profile, your Mastodon profile, send it to people in messages, just send it over whatever platform you want, doesn't matter. But we think communities should be open and super frictionless to share and to join. Another major use case that we wanted to look at first with this is workspaces. So if you're working on a team or a project, you probably want to have the utmost confidence that this is a safe space, that it's private and it's invite only, and only people that you want will be able to access those rooms and will be able to read those conversations. And then lastly, the sort of third archetype that we wanted to focus on, which is more metric specific, is just the ability to be able to mix any set of rooms into any way that you want. And again, this is something, it's a common piece of feedback that we get from people that use kind of other more prevalent platforms, where if you join a workspace or a server or whatever, you're basically at the behest of whoever set it up. So maybe your manager sucks at organizing conversations, and maybe you'd be way more productive if you could organize rooms in a better list for yourself. Or likewise, maybe you're participating in 100 different online communities and you don't want to have to be able to tab between 50 or 100 different workspaces. It'd be really useful just to be able to grab individual rooms, individual discussions, and just have full control over your view of all of that. So those are the three main things that we're hoping to solve first with this. And then I've got a demo, which is very short and sweet. And the reason for that is that in order to kind of explain the feature in full, we kind of need to do a whistle-stop tour of lots of different areas of the app. So I'll give a quick demo first and then come back to some of the comps and some of the talking points. So here I've got, so this should be live. I would not recommend using, if you do manage to navigate to this URL, I would not recommend using your real world account because everything we're looking at is highly experimental, but you can log into this account. You can log in over here and you can enable this, and there's a labs flag in settings in here, and then you can play around with this if you like. But you'll notice that over here, this has changed immediately. So we've got a little home icon here, which I'll explain better in a second, but I'm just going to hit create a space over here. And the first thing that I'm asked is what I'm going to use this space for. And then I'm just going to create a public community for now. And then one thing that we think is really important is that when you are an ambassador of a space or an admin of one, or you're trying to share a space with other people, we think it's super important that it is instantly recognizable and that all of the metadata around there is useful for the people that are receiving, for example, an invite for this. And then for this, I've prepared a picture of bread because we're going to make a bread making community. And over here, you can give it a name and then just say, give it a description. Let's talk about bread. And then this should work, hopefully, fingers crossed. Another thing that we think is really important is that different spaces, in order to have a good, coherent experience across multiple discussions, we think spaces need to have at least a few rooms. So let's say that we're going to talk about, I don't know, sourdough and donuts and one sort of type of bread. Baguettes, why not? And here we are, you see that Element's created these rooms over here on the side. This is very work in progress developer UI, by the way, so ignore this. But once you've added some rooms to your space, again, there's no point having a space that no one else is using. So we think it's super important that you share that. And once we look at the other paths, we've tried to be very considerate about your intentions and goals depending on how you're going to use this space. So as the simplest example, if I'm creating a public community, I probably want to be able to share that by URL and just post that wherever I want. Whereas if I'm creating something for a team or project, especially if I'm in a company, I'm probably going to want to invite people by email if they don't have a matrix ID. So the user experience will prioritize the most prominent way to solve your goal depending on your context. So I'll just hit finish, and then here I've effectively got a new community with a bunch of different rooms, and you can see that we've also been updating the UX around creating new rooms and things like that quite recently in Element. But effectively, I'd be able to just invite someone to the community, they'd be able to join, and they'd be able to join all of these rooms as well. And then I'd just be able to switch between these like I would be able to in most other communication platforms, pretty much. And then, did I hear a hint of a question there?
Just a tiny one. The question was, well, it's from me, but why are we saying that you have to have a certain number of rooms before you can create a community? Why can't a space? Why can't I create a placeholder, an empty thing? Is this something that can be done through Matrix itself, or is this just purely a limitation of the Element designs?
You absolutely can create a space with no rooms. We just think that if your goal is to create a community or to work in a team or on a project, that you're going to have a bad time. So in all of the steps, there is a little skip button at the bottom, and the protocol would support you creating a space with no spaces. Sorry, a space with no rooms. Gotcha. But we're just really trying to sort of walk backwards from people's goals and get them to a good place, rather than necessarily letting the technology be less opinionated to a point where you have a worse time, basically.
Understood. Yeah. So you can always skip the wizard, and this is the value of product thinking, not just tech all the time, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, in a lot of the user research and testing that we're doing, it's like night and day pretty much once you look at the journeys from joining a community or joining a workspace and so on. Just having a rich environment with good content is so impactful to you being able to successfully communicate, pretty much, rather than having an empty space. So we think it's super important. I'd be surprised if a lot of people skip these steps, but let's see. I like to be surprised. I like to be pleasantly surprised. So it's okay. But cool. Yeah, and then just to run through a bit of a whistle-stop tour of a few different areas of kind of related features to the core functionality of Spaces. So one of the more prevalent changes we're making to Element is the concept of a home, where we think that if you're participating in lots of different spaces, we think that you would benefit from having a really easy place to reach to be able to springboard into all of your direct messages and all of your favorite rooms as well across all of your spaces. And so that's a change that we're coming up over here. The other thing is that spaces themselves technically are backed by rooms. So every space is essentially a room, but with extra metadata. And so home is also a good place for us to, it's missing from this comp, which is my mistake, but home is also a good place for us to put rooms which don't belong to spaces. And so if you are a Matrix user and you're just never going to participate in spaces, you could effectively just still surf through with only using home and having an experience really close to what you have today, where you can just discreetly join individual rooms and just not care about spaces if they don't help you at all. So home is a pretty kind of big visible change that we're making to the Element apps. Another is I spoke about hierarchies a little bit earlier, but we think, or rather we hear that navigating hierarchies is a huge problem in representing them within workspaces and within communication software today is a huge problem for people. So the kinds of things that we're looking at is effectively just exposing tree views, but just figuring out how to make them sing in different contexts. So over here, we've got a couple of UI comps of explore rooms, which is effectively an iteration on what we have today inside Element. And then otherwise, we're doing lots of testing around. I've got a Figma prototype here of being able to collapse and expand trees in the same way you would do in, say, like a file manager. And one of the really sort of cool aspirations we have here, and we're figuring out some of the minutiae at the moment because it's quite a complex problem. But in principle, we don't see a reason for you not to be able to nest. So these are actually child spaces which are being nested within this space here. And we don't see a reason for you to be limited by how you can nest, other than if we think it's going to harm the usability in the future. So we're still doing a bunch of research on the best way to execute on this, but there could be a world where you could effectively just nest these spaces within each other the same way you would do folders in a file system, and then just navigate them however makes sense. Some of the challenges with that are mostly around things like sorting orders and ensuring that you don't miss messages. So for example, if you do have 5 kind of nested spaces within each other, because let's say you've got a company and you create a subspace for your London office, and then you create a subspace for the marketing team, and then a subspace for one of their projects, etc. It makes sense from a top-down view, but there's a real risk that you might miss messages if the rooms are nested too far out of view. So we're still working on those kinds of problems, but the protocol will support these use cases, and we're just figuring out how to deliver the best experience in Element. So hierarchies is something that we're really interested in. And yeah, I mentioned earlier really just that again, the UX for this is really just driven around what your goal is depending on your use case. So as the simplest example, again, just if I'm going to share a community, I probably care about using URLs more, and inviting specific people by email or by their matrix ID is probably a secondary action. Whereas if I'm explicitly saying, like, I'm going to create a private workspace to work on a project with my colleagues, we'll prioritize things like email. So we're still dotting the I's and crossing the T's on a lot of these, but so far things are looking super promising, and we've had really good feedback in a lot of the research and testing sessions so far as well. Some other stuff that we're looking at is really just smoothing the onboarding as much as possible. So I mentioned before that the reason why we're working on Spaces is to ensure that people can get going with Matrix and kind of reduce friction around the first-time user experience. And this is so pivotal to, if this is your first interaction with the protocol, and to being able to have a good view of what you're about to sign up for. There's some other technical things that we need to do to unblock these. I don't know if Matthew, you could speak briefly to any of the specifics around things like peaking over federation.
Sure. I mean, to get the best experience, you're going to need to be able to peek over federation, so you can see other people's spaces without actually having to join them, because the act of joining a space basically is becoming a member of that space. So like a card-carrying member of a particular community, workspace, collection, whatever it is. So peeking lets you just look but not touch, and it's actually implemented in Dendrite now. We need to go and do it in Synapse. But we should be able to play with the Dendrite code base on that.
Cool. Yeah, and then just another sort of points to sort of call out as well would be the other things that we've been looking at are things like deep links. So for example, on mobile, if someone invites me to a space and then I go to the App Store or to the Google Play Store or to F-Droid or wherever, and I grab the app, and then if I launch the app and it's just empty and I can't navigate to the space I want to get to, I think that's a huge problem. So we're looking at ways in a privacy preserving manner to sort of deep link your intention, so that when you do launch the app, then you can get pointed in the right direction, which is really interesting. And then some other stuff, we've done a little bit of R&D around our email invite system to ensure that they're technically reliable, and we'll end up invariably polishing the usability around email invites all round as we carry on down the Spaces path. And another thing that will probably get more important over time will be the return of what was previously known as ILAG on the Element web client, which was short for Improved Landing as Guest. And I believe we now refer to it as incremental sign-up. But basically, that's the ability to preview a room or preview a space, be able to see the discussion, start to send messages as a guest, and then to sort of commit to an account when, like, after that fact. So rather than forcing you to create an account up front, we think in future it'd be really great for you to just do as much as possible and then just sort of build up your account over time, basically.
A really nice use case for that is embedded chat on web pages. So we have people using Matrix for essentially sales on their website, and being able to convert those guest accounts into users that then they can track and so on is, it's really good.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. There's also, I mean, it's totally greenfield and sci-fi, but if anyone out there has been tracking things like hydrogen, it'd be really interesting to look at hydrogen and how that could lend itself to those use cases, and also things, just to build on what you're saying there, Ben, things like the sort of intercom style kind of embedded chatbot experience. Not chatbot's the wrong word because you talk to humans, but this sort of little kind of applet within a page as well would be like super interesting to see these kinds of use cases thrive once we work better on all of these areas. And then just to talk briefly about what's coming up next. If you are interested in the changes to the Matrix spec, MSC 1772 is the best place to look at this. And then I think it's had quite a deep history. Actually, I need to double check, but I believe that I feel like that MSC first went into draft a couple of years ago, possibly, and it's essentially evolved as we've kind of restarted effort in this in earnest in the last couple of months. And yeah, on the Element side, so we're focusing on previews on web and Android first, just because we can execute the quickest there. I can't speak to dates on these actually at the moment, but we should hopefully get stuff on development channels to play around with by the end of the year, fingers crossed. And then sort of think more about how we can release widely. But we would release across all of iOS web, which includes desktop clients and Android at the same time. Because it's no good if you create a space and then invite someone and say if they're an iOS user, if they can't participate in that space. And the other thing I mentioned earlier is that we still have some work to do just around just de-risking some of the usability concerns and some of the kind of dragons that we're finding as we're dog feeding this over time, mostly around hierarchies, but hopefully we can find something really good there. And that's at a very high level. That's kind of a bit of everything on the overall direction of Spaces.
Fab, thank you so much. We actually have quite a few questions, which is not to say that it wasn't an informative discussion, but I think people are really curious. So I'm gonna hit you with some of these. I filtered them a bit, and also thank you to Michael, tech guy in the chat, who's been fielding some of the more technical ones. But I would say try to answer these with a product hat rather than a spec hat. So can spaces intersect, asks Kim, as in can a room belong to multiple spaces?
Yes, this is something we've gone round on quite a lot, but fundamentally yes, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to organize your own personal spaces, for example. There is a concept of, and I forget where we landed on the technical implementation exactly, but as an end user, there is a concept of a main space. So as an example, we have Matrix HQ, and we'll delegate Matrix HQ to be a part of the Matrix community. And that way, if you join Matrix HQ, you know how to springboard into the kind of official, authoritative, canonical, related community for Matrix. So the concept of a main space will always exist, but rooms will be able to belong to multiple spaces. So that way, someone could create a community of, my favorite messaging protocols, and Matrix HQ could be a member of that space also. But the way the user experience will work in Element is that if you join a room which belongs to a space, you'll essentially be able to also preview the space once you're participating in the room. So effectively, we'll say, whilst you're looking at Matrix HQ, we'll say, hey, did you know there's a Matrix community? Ta-da!
Yeah. So this brings up something really interesting, because if you are a member of a space and a member of some rooms within that space, can you, for example, see the other rooms? Can an admin, one of the questions that came in really early was, can you send a message to a space? And the answer is yes, because it's a room, but the client is encouraged to not show that message. But then can an admin collect everybody within a space and send a message, cascading? How does that work?
Yeah, so the main room, which is acting as the kind of main space, is a really interesting one, because technically that room exists, and there's an argument for things like having a sort of general lobby, for example. So if I join the Matrix community, should I be able to chat in a kind of lobby where that's the spaces lobby, like the community lobby, rather than a specific topic-based room, and so on. And the decision we've made for now is that for the first version, just to get this out there, to be able to learn from this first, we're really concerned that people won't know how to rediscover that lobby, and they don't have a... Sorry, I cut out slightly, I think.
Yeah, just rewind just 10 seconds or so.
Okay, I'll start again because I'm not sure where I cut out. So that room exists, the room which is acting as the space. We're concerned that it's not congruent with any spatial model that makes sense to people. So, when you use Element, you're kind of trained to know that message timelines belong to rooms, and that rooms are a row in the room list, pretty much. And we're concerned about breaking that model effectively. So that room will exist, and what we've done for now is we've basically just said, whilst we don't know how people will use it, we'll just descope it, or rather just not expose it. But it's definitely, that was one of the biggest sort of back and forths we had internally, and it's definitely something we'll iterate on over time, for sure.
Sure. There are lots of questions of edge cases which I just don't know are appropriate for discussion on the video. I mean, one of the examples is, if a room could be part of multiple spaces and some are private, what can the Matrix server see on its end when the primary room address for that space is located? Does it see who added this room to its space? And that is a genuine privacy concern that I think that you guys must have talked through at some point, but I'm not going to hold you to an answer to all of these right now.
Sure. We can also take some of the kind of more specific questions, I guess, after this as well. I think we can chat away in the room as well.
So some of these questions have been answered as we went along, I think. So will there be user-side spaces that simply allow users to organize stuff into folders? Yes, because you can create your space and add your rooms to it arbitrarily. Yeah, and there's actually a couple of interesting thoughts that we have on this. Like, one is that, we think that people would be more productive or have saner lives if they can just control how they organize rooms themselves. Is kind of the first thought. I do that with communities now, but it's a little clunky. Yeah, no, for sure. Clunky is definitely the word for the existing groups implementation. But so that's the first thought, that we just think that people will, if people can control their view of the world, that's a good thing for them. And the second thing, which we haven't quite felt out 100% yet, and the reality is that we need to launch and then see how this plays out in the wild, but there's an opportunity for it to be used for curation as well, where, like, Twitter has a really great lists feature, where if you join Twitter and you're not sure where to start, you can curate accounts into lists and then publish those, and then you can use those to curate Twitter, as one example. And it'll be interesting to see if these kind of personal spaces also end up serving that use case as well. So it could be really interesting to be able to create, like, here's my favorite blah rooms or whatever, and then be able to broadcast that, and then almost existing users would then act as kind of ambassadors and curators for the people that they're introducing to the ecosystem. Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of platforms have a sort of best of or tagging system, and you could basically use spaces to do anything like that entails making a set. Yeah. Actually, one of the biggest challenges we have with this concept is that it makes sense academically,
Like we're having this discussion, and we're both, kind of on board with this, but it's a really hard thing to get the usability right. Even just picking the right noun, like we did lots of user testing between things like lists or groups or collections, and like none of it's singing, like none of it is, we don't have high confidence in any of them. So I think this will be one of those sort of launch and learn and iterate kind of corners for this feature.
The tech and the spec are so much more versatile than the first version of the product needs to be. And you can lock it down quite a bit. The risk of some of the power users probably watching are going to get themselves in a knot, no doubt. There's some niche stuff. Flares are currently controlled by community. How are we going to implement Flare in the future?
You know what? I genuinely can't remember where we resolved to on this.
I get
it. Great.
So first of all, it isn't done yet, obviously in the implementation, but the thought experiment is to use extensible profiles to let people advertise the spaces or the communities or whatever you call them that they are members of, that they want to have Flare available for. So we are still going to be basing Flare on spaces, but it's using this brave new world of extensible profiles and groups as rooms, i.e. spaces, in order to model it. And there are a couple of unsolved problems on it so far. Probably in the initial cut, we'll still be using the old groups to define them, but the intention is obviously to move it all over to spaces.
Fab. All right, there's two more questions, because I mean, a lot of the questions now are becoming basically set theory, which I'm not going to ask you to answer over the phone. So this is interesting. Does default rooms mean a home server could also join new users to a space? This is something that we'd implement with bots in today's world, and we could even automate it to an extent. But I wonder if that could be a server level feature.
That's a great idea,
yeah.
For sure. Yeah, that's something. So actually, that's something we haven't quite. The first implementation of all of this, we're really concerned with creating and managing spaces, and then the admins and moderators of those kind of actively inviting people to them, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're focusing for the first cut. And what you just described there, I've just made a note in my notes there to come back to it later. Because we'll look at those kinds of things next, along with things like just discovery of spaces all round. Like, for example, when you create an account without an invite, we just call that a cold start. So if I just go to element.io and I just create an account and I've just started and I don't know what I'm looking for example, we'll start with this. Once we have spaces working with the first implementation, we'll look at those use cases as well, to look at things like spaces discovery. Like, should I create an account, and then should we ask you, like, hey, what are you into? Like, do you like bread?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because I can imagine, in a closed corporate setting, then yeah, you could curate that massively, just auto join to a bunch of rooms, and then give some suggestions for others. So yeah, there's the customization available as a result of that is pretty huge.
Yeah, and it also dovetails back to what we were discussing a few minutes ago about the idea of curation as well. Like we might end up calling those subscriptions, for example, and then maybe you subscribe to a list of things, and then and then home servers absolutely could also join people to these spaces to then let them springboard into more useful places and all the rest.
All right, the last question is silly. Why don't you rebrand Element as MySpace if you love spaces so much?
I have fond memories of MySpace. Is what I'll say on that.
Oh, do you know what that has reminded me? And the question I didn't write down is the idea is there's no more dumping HTML into the landing page. The idea is to use the room.description, m.room.description, and then build from there, and maybe it's markdown. Is that right?
Yeah, so this falls into the same bucket of useful features that make sense technically, that we're just not confident whether users expect or need them in the journey, basically. So they're not designed out, but they are absent from the first cut, basically. And I think as we evolve the first time user experience of spaces, once spaces exist, this will be similar to the sort of lobby question of like having kind of a lobby chat or the main chat for that space. This will be another point that we come back to continually. Because at the moment, I think we'll just rely on people using the Ream descriptions along with maybe a mixture of things like pinned messages and all the rest to kind of get the community guidelines out there and stuff like that.
So the last question, I guess, is from me, is what is the ETA? When can people start to play with it? And when are you stamping it?
So Michael, otherwise known as Tech Guy, who's been answering questions and so on, is probably horrified at the idea of people launching to the URL that I was just streaming then, as it's literally bleeding edge. We will broadcast as loud as we can through the usual channels, I guess is what I'll say on that when we have more info. But web and Android, something playable this year. Through some kind of development channel, like at least there's a labs flag on a develop to be able to click some buttons with probably lots of dragons and unhappy paths. That will exist at least, and how loudly we can shout out about it to be confirmed.
Yeah, based on what we saw just then, it feels like having something that people can play with on develop by the end of the year might not be implausible at all. And hopefully we have people starting to create experimental new spaces and, as you say, start trying to test it and find out what goes wrong. I have one last thing, if I may, and I feel this is the first time that I've seen the stuff that Michael's been doing, today, I guess, and over the last couple of days, and it's very cool to see the demo live on Open Tech Will Save Us for the first time ever. But there's also one which came in today that Nad hasn't seen, so I was wondering whether I can go and get my revenge on Nad. In that Bruno and I have been playing a bit with the dirty secret of what happens in the left panel during this. And I think, Nad, you touched on it by saying that the hierarchy question is yet to be solved. We haven't tried to solve it, but we had to brainstorm about a couple of days ago, I think at the end of Monday, and Bruno had been playing around with it today. And the question is the never-ending one of how we try to make the left panel more manageable. And there is a prototype experiment, which, will you kill me if I go and randomly share this to see what you make of it and possibly what other people make of it as one possible option of some future world with the left panel in element way?
Cool. No, there's no bad ideas in brainstorming. Cool,
says Nad, shaking his head. Okay, let me just screen share. What's the worst that can happen on this? Just can crash. That can happen.
You're missing doing dangerous demos, I think.
Oh God, yeah. I miss conferences and the opportunities to make it easier for myself. Well, this is Bruno's work, and I haven't asked him for permission to show it. First of all, graphically, obviously, this is placeholder. And what we have here are 4 random sections of our hypothetical left panel. You got your favorite, some other section, could be, I know, a different space, which has been merged in, and you got your rooms and your people. Ignore the buttons, but you also have these red resizes here. Now, the interesting thing that we have is that the favorites thing, I'm currently trying to scroll, nothing is happening. I'm trying to scroll the whole list, nothing is happening. If I go into this section and I start to scroll it, oh, look, we've got letterboxes back again. And it's like, I know, March all over again that we've got our letterboxes back, right, web. But what would happen if we could also go and resize this down? Ooh, suddenly we're back in having one great big list like we have today. So it's a hybrid between the old letterbox mode and the new resizable, whatever you call it, section mode. And the interesting thing is that despite the fact that here, if I go here, I can now scroll within this list. If I try to go anywhere else, like the gutter, and scroll the big list, you effectively have a scroll within a scroll. You have to play with it a bit and see how bad or not bad it feels. But I think it might possibly have legs as the ultimate hybrid between letterboxes, where you scroll within a section like this, and the more flexible resizey thing. And critically, it also lets you resize a lot more easily than we can today. Like I'm resizing by middle mouse button scrolling here, and I've hit the bottom of it and expanded it out. you've also got the ability to do a maximize and minimize a bit like you do today. And this might possibly give us full flexibility over whether you want some combination of letterboxes coupled with just a big scroll if you also want a big scroll. And obviously, casual users will start off simple, and then as you get more rooms, you have to start juggling this problem more. So you saw it here first. Nad looks somewhat petrified. What do you think?
No, cool. So the yeah, I mean, just maybe for everyone else's kind of benefit, sort of watching this for extra context. Navigating rooms is a really hard problem to solve, and that probably sounds really dumb given how so many platforms exist and already do a good job of this. But Matrix is just kind of unique in how multi-use it is, and with a mix of public and private rooms, and having some people join hundreds if not thousands of public rooms. And so this is probably one of the most contentious is probably the wrong word, but probably one of the most overly discussed kind of parts of the app in terms of what we do on product, because everyone has different goals, and if we talk to 50 different people, we get 50 different answers on how they expect to be able to navigate between rooms. So yeah, this is really exciting, and it's because we effectively launched one version with the rebrand earlier this year, and then yeah, this is really cool to see actually that we're doing more iteration.
Yeah, definitely a lot more iteration needed, and I'm not sure it is the way of things to go. But we've been talking about that, I think, since the second day you joined the project about 2 years ago. And it was hey, why don't we let the letterboxes get resized? And then scroll within scroll. How bad could that be? That's going to be terrible. And then we moved on, and so finally we've gone and kind of backtracked up to the top of the maze to go and see what that path might be.
Yeah, actually, just as a very small anecdote or side note to that, I don't know if anyone has helped a less technical friend set up their email if they've joined like a new company or had a new job or something like that, and they always have like such specific requests. They'll be like, oh, I want my calendar invites to go into this folder, or I want these emails to skip my inbox, or I want this to be labeled that way, and so on and so forth. And every workflow is kind of bespoke, and I think navigating rooms in Matrix is as bespoke and ask, basically. So that's why it's a complex problem, basically.
Yeah, that is interesting. It means you can be quite prescriptive on the product side while getting the flexibility from the spec. All right, we've talked. Thank you, Nad. I'm so looking forward to this, and I know that a lot of people are as well. I've also got users and customers who are like, where are my spaces? I want to say thank you to Angie. Thank you for presenting Mobilisant, or Mobilize, as it's translated. Thank you for Ben for the relaunch and revival of WebThings. And thank you, Nad and Matthew, for talking through the state of Matrix Spaces. Thank you. Oh, and I want to say thank you to Dave for organizing the AV, because I never say thanks to him. So thanks, you all. Speak soon. Bye.
Bye.